Hello, Miss Reema. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Congrats on your new book, The Yogi's Way, Transform Your Mind, Health, and Reality, which who doesn't want that? And
Right.
I want to hear. So tell us about this 12-step program, because what I love about what you did, because I did this with a few of my books too, is I had online courses and then turned them into books. And it's so cool because then you have, I don't know, kind of a beautiful workbook to go along with the digital course you've created. And so we've got week 1 through 12, which is just chock full readers, listeners that you can see here. And yeah, so tell us about the history of this, of creating this, and then these 12 steps.
Gosh, I think the seeds of the book were in me for over a decade. There were so many forces that guided me to write this, but one was just, I grew up with yoga. It's in my family. My first teachers were my parents and grandparents. So I feel very lucky that I got to get it from them first and get their perspective and just grow up with a lot of the wisdom teachings and texts. And but I was born and brought up in the United States, so I have a good understanding of the Eastern and Western mind, and it's just been so clear to me, like this gap where in the West and actually all over the world, yoga is often equated with a physical practice. You go to a yoga class, that means you're going to go and stretch your body for about an hour, and there could be some meditation and pranayama, but the bulk of it is like a sequence of movement, which is beautiful. I personally love movement and I love dynamic sequences of asana. So I've always enjoyed that. But it's such a contrast from what yoga is in India, or at least when I was growing up and my parents were growing up. We're becoming like this global world, so everything is changing. But the original yoga texts focus on the mind and on consciousness, not really the body so much at all. So there's such that gap. Whereas here in the West, it's rooted in the body, whereas in the East, it's rooted in the mind and consciousness. So one of the reasons I wrote the book is to start bridging that gap and just really introduce readers to those original teachings of yoga. And from the very basics, like what even is the mind? Like the mind is defined as the storehouse of thoughts and emotions. So there's all these beautiful teachings on how to how to understand the human mind and approach it with compassion and understanding and acceptance, and to really see the tendencies of the mind and to be with our attachments and our anger and our anxieties and fears and learn how to work through them so they don't grip us and strip us of our energy, but instead we can meet them and work through them and help them, they can help us heal. So those teachings on the mind are so relevant for today's world because so many of us are struggling in our minds. I've struggled in my mind, so I know what it's like to be gripped by anxiety or anger, these really intense emotions. Because those teachings have helped me when I've gone through tough times, I felt like I'm not the only one that gets gripped by these kind of thoughts and emotions. So I wanted to bring those teachings to I've taught them in workshops and trainings, but there's only so much one person can travel and teach. So I decided a few years ago to write this book. And then besides the mind, there's like consciousness, which yoga is like really rooted in the original teaching. So then it becomes a lot of the book is also exploring this dimension of consciousness. What even is that? And in the ancient Sanskrit texts, they have beautiful ways to describe consciousness because it's something that's beyond description, but it's still something that we can start to understand so that we can eventually have a direct experience of it. So one of the most beautiful ways I feel the ancient Sanskrit texts describe consciousness is they'll compare the mind and consciousness to the sea. So there's these teachings that they'll say the mind is like the surfaces of the sea. It's like constantly changing and moving and shifting. And there's big waves and there's little waves, and they're moving in this direction and that direction. And that's just the nature of the mind, like it moves. And so that's okay, then the mind moves. We don't have to fight it, we don't have to judge it. But then if you imagine the very depths of the sea, there's this like amazing stillness and quietness and vastness. And that's the dimension of consciousness. And actually, the true meaning of yoga is to yoke with consciousness, to yoke with that dimension. So I don't know where this started, because it's like in the mainstream that yoga is defined as union of mind, body, and spirit. And I disagree with that. I feel like that's a mistranslation because the yogis are saying that we're actually not our mind, like all those fleeting thoughts and emotions. That's not who we are. And we're not our changing bodies. That's not who we are. Like who we truly are is this vastness of consciousness, this like field of infinite possibility and pure potentiality. And the true meaning of yoga is to connect to that dimension, not just for a moment, but to practice daily and really come to become familiar with that dimension, really get to know it, and eventually anchor ourselves in that dimension as we move through the world. And if we can do that, then everything we do is more effective and authentic and sweet. So I found like those teachings on the mind and consciousness almost absent in a lot of the yoga world. And I valued so much from them and I've needed them so much because I have been caught up in those changing waves of the mind. And I have experienced how thoughts and emotions can drain our energy and just grip us and can be very tough. So I felt like, yeah, I need to write this book and just reach more people.
Yeah, yeah. And I love you bringing it back, right, to the importance of what was coming up for me was Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which I may be mispronouncing a little. Yoga's a cessation of the fluctuations of the mind. It's not, I can't even think, like one of the crazy, like poses, the Sanskrit name.
Ashtavakasana or
Yeah,
something.
so you're like, that's not, it is, but it's not.
Yeah.
And yeah, I really appreciate you highlighting this, right? And so I'm curious for you as to how this translates and how this is showing up in a midlife way as you think about you recognizing this is how I grew up, this is what I was exposed to, this is what I'm seeing, and how do I bridge that as I'm also adjusting to the aging process? Is how this is all tied in for you.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. And I feel the aging process is in our face that things change, right? This the impermanence of it all. And what I find really beautiful about these teachings is that, like, when we embrace change and we're connected to that dimension of consciousness, because the thing about consciousness is it's actually a dimension that's unchanging, right? So it's like this field of possibility that is always here. And so even with aging, it's that change is not good or bad, but it's a field of possibility. So it's, yeah, just consciousness helps us get away from those terms of good, bad, better, worse. Like we assume that youth is better than age, but that's strange because as we age, we get wiser and like our wisdom gets to settle in our bodies and in our beings and we get to share it more. That's such an amazing, beautiful thing. So even just to get away from good or bad, right or wrong, better or worse, and just this is what's happening now, and the field of infinite possibility is still here. So it's awesome and exciting. Like what can be birthed from this moment and from this space. And that's been it's easy to say, but it's been a process to really learn that. I share a little bit. I weave some personal stories in the book. And one of the stories I share is when my daughter was 3 years old, I went through a separation with her father. And that was like a really devastating time for me. And I was really gripped with like attachment and anger and fear and shame and isolation and all of these emotions. And it actually took a couple years, but I at one moment, I realized that instead of having to perceive this thing as something horrible or bad or wrong, it's just I can accept it and be open to the potential of the moment. Because we think that, like, our minds do this to us. Like, we think that we have to look a certain way or be a certain way. And especially when we're aging, that gets messed up because we don't look the way we necessarily want to or we used to. But it's just this beautiful opportunity to accept and open to the possibility that, and it's okay. Even after having a baby, I share this in the book too, that it was hard because before having a child, I used to travel and teach. I came to your studio and taught at some point, but I was like traveling a lot before becoming a mother, like all over Europe and Asia. And there was a point I was in a different country like every week. It was a little much, but it was my life for a few years. And then after, of course, after having a baby, like I didn't do that. And which was fine. Like I loved being a mother and having a small child, and I still love being a mother. But it was such a drastic shift. And I had moments where I was like, who am I? And my life is just like drastically different. And it can be depressing. It's what's going on. But then it's even that I experienced this shift. Like instead of grasping to who I was before having a child, it was when I changed my mind, it was more like I don't have to grip to that person or even, and that person, it's okay if she doesn't even exist anymore. Like it's not a big deal because again, every moment is pure potential. So it's who am I now? And then it becomes something like intriguing and exciting instead of depressing. Instead of focusing on the things, the parts of yourself that you're losing or that have gone, it's but what's here now. And that's like an exciting journey.
Yeah.
So I see aging that way too. It's wow, I get to let all my experiences and all my wisdom like simmer within me. And I get to be someone who's older and I get to share that. And that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying too, the recognition, because this is really big in midlife, I think throughout our lives, but particularly in midlife is the shedding of identities or the taking on new identities, right? So you go from world traveler regularly to probably home with your child for a bit, steady and stable in one place. And as we began talking before we were recording, for me, having a yoga studio, being a yoga teacher for almost 20 years, and then letting go of that identity of just like how hard that is. It's a complete unraveling of who you thought you were and how you expressed yourself in the world. But it's also, as you're saying, it's a wonderful way to reinvent and to show who you are now and how things are changing. And because I know for a lot of people too, at this stage, it's like empty nests, right? They're like, I was a mom, I'm still a mom, but they're not
Yeah.
here anymore. So now what do I do? And it can just be
Yeah.
really, it's jarring because we're constantly, there are these shifting identities and roles. And is there anything in particular that you found helpful in your journey of shifting roles, of even being partnered to not partnered for a bit during that separation and however that ended up? It's like, how do you encourage listeners to unravel that while still holding the preciousness of it and opening doors for what's next?
Yeah, I think it's chapter 5 of my book. It's called Stories. And it's just like how much of our life is shaped by the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And we can have labels we put on ourselves and qualities and characteristics. And one of my favorite teachings of yoga is to recognize that none of that is real. Like the mind can make up a story. And it's nice to have stories that are empowering. I'm capable, I'm strong, I'm pure. And let those kinds of stories shape your life. But like if we really look at the qualities and characteristics and identities we place on ourselves, then there's this very beautiful practice in the ancient teachings of yoga called neti neti, which means not this and not that. And you recognize that you look at all the labels that you place on yourself or that society has placed on you. And I'm not really this. And I'm not really that. For example, even like kindness, like such a sweet, beautiful label. I could be kind in the morning, but maybe in the afternoon something will happen and I have a moment where I'm cruel. That's possible. I'm human. Or I can feel lonely one day and isolated, but then the next day I choose to connect with community. So it's if we really look at the labels and identities, we'll see that none of them are fixed. None of them are absolutely true. And there's such a freedom to be had in that because the greatest freedom, the yogis would say, is quality or characteristic that you can put on yourself. So you're actually nothing. And it sounds bizarre, but if you look at even quantum physics, what they're finding, they'll say that everything is made of cells. Cells are made up of molecules. Molecules are made up of atoms. Atoms are 99.99% empty space. And that's what the yogis say, that actually we look like we have all the solidity, but if you really look within, like to your depths, you'll see that you are made up 99.9% of empty space. So it's amazing that the teachings of yoga and quantum physics are actually the same. And but that is so liberating. If we place them on ourselves, then the nature of the mind is to grasp to them. So then we spend our whole lives like trying to live up to those identities and trying to protect them and defend them. And it's actually prison because then we lose our freedom. Like even for me, I took a break from teaching yoga when my daughter was young and some breaks while I was writing this book. But then as I re-entered the yoga world and so much has changed as we were talking about with COVID and studios closing. But it's been like a process to even, I'm just in the question, like wondering, like, how do I want to teach yoga now? But even that teaching of neti neti and empty, like how we're just open and empty at our core is really helpful because I don't have to grasp to the ways that I used to teach yoga. Like maybe my yoga class would be 90% mantra and 10% movement. I don't know. But I can give myself that freedom to try different things and to not be attached to a certain way. Not just how I used to teach yoga, but how the whole world is teaching yoga. So there's a lot of freedom and just letting go of the labels and identities.
Yeah, yeah, the non-grasping. And what I like about that too is that it does bring about a sense of kind of liberation and opening of possibilities and what's next and what's possible, which I do think for many people is big during midlife. And I'm curious for you, your career journey. It sounds like it's been a lot has happened, right? From teaching, being in a new country every month to like then being home with your daughter and now re-entering the teaching world and creating this course and writing this book. Share a little bit about how reinvention has showed up for you and how you've navigated it.
Part of it is allowing myself space. I think in my younger years, I just filled my schedule like as much as possible and was just running around. And it's like every opportunity was a yes. And just like that I feel has shifted. Where like I really let myself pause and consider, is this in resonance and is this a good match? And give myself that respect and that freedom to choose where I want to place my energy and how I want to use it. And so that feels like a big shift. And I feel like, yeah, like more than the quantity, it just feels like making the quality rich. And that entails letting myself rest and nurture myself and just learn that balance of receiving and giving and really just honoring that. Because as you've probably witnessed too, in this kind of field of yoga, it's like we can burn out easily and we can forget about ourselves. And a lot of us are empathic and we're givers. And so to really learn how to strike that balance of slowing down, caring for ourselves, and then, giving our gifts.
Yeah, for sure. And that leads me to another question of just asking for you, what is your personal practice? Like, what's your self-care ritual or steps that you find on a daily, if not daily, regular basis to refill your.
In general, I just try not to rush, like even just getting up in the morning and getting ready. And I try to make it all a ritual, like just caring for ourselves, like seeing ourselves. Because I think, again, as yogis, it's easy for us to see the divine in the world and to see the people and nature as divine, but to remember that we're also a divine being. So to take care of how we care for ourselves, not in a rush, but even small things like taking time to moisturize our skin and like really make a beautiful cup of tea and cook nurturing food. Like all of that is, I see as self-care. And in my personal practice, I've always loved movement. So that's like a part of my daily practice and life. And I find myself just giving myself the freedom to exploring where I'm drawn. So I've definitely the last few years I'm more and more drawn to mantra. That's always been a part of my practice, but I spend more and more time singing and enjoying a mantra practice. So that's something that has just naturally happened and I allow it and I'm starting to share it more in my classes. And so just letting that organic process be.
Yeah. Would you say, whenever you say mantra, is it kirtan style or is it?
Yeah, mostly
Yeah.
kirtan
Okay.
style. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Which I love sharing. And it feels like, wherever I go, people are most excited about that. So often I'll teach like a weekend workshop and there'll be movement and pranayama and even Ayurvedic cooking. And I'll do it like I call it lifestyle of a yogi and I'll bring in all these elements. But when it's like time for mantra, it's like for our kirtan, everyone is just so ultra excited. And so it's sweet. It's sweet.
It is. There's something, it just, as you were saying all this, it just brought me back to all the yoga journal conferences, which I don't even know that they still have those, but where like Krishna Das would be played and just like how good that felt. And I'm reading a lot about healing the nervous system now. And one thing that is recommended is like humming or chanting. So it's like, we always knew it felt good, and you probably know the science behind that. But now it's wow. And I'm looking down because I have a book here, Heal Your Nervous System, that I've been
Okay.
reading. And that's one of the things. And so I'm like, wow, it brings it full circle of like how beautiful the practice is, not just because it feels good, but there is actually science behind
Yeah.
it. And I think it's the vibration and the throat, something that's supposed to help with vagal
The,
tone.
the ventral vagal nerve. Yeah, there was
Yes, thank
research
you.
just on Om and how it affects the ventral
Yeah.
vagal nerve and not just relaxing, but also opening up feelings of connection with oneself and others. So I was like, that's interesting because Om is like that connects you with the universe and
Right.
everything within it. So it is very wild how science is just proving, like supporting all these practices. And yeah.
Yeah.
But it does feel like with everything going on in the world, we need a little extra care to our nervous systems. And singing feels like almost the most immediate path to that, to just like dropping in and relaxing and connecting.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm gonna have to pull out a Krishna Das CD. CD. But yeah, it is. It's really powerful. And I think one of my favorite memories is being in India and going to RT. And I'm blanking on his name, but he's a pretty famous Swami. But it's the town where the Beatles were.
I'm not
People
sure.
call it like the Disneyland of yoga. It's
Rishikesh?
Rishikesh.
Rishikesh. Okay.
Rishikesh. Oh, you say Rishikesh. Okay, Rishikesh.
Rishikesh. Right. Yeah.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
there.
Okay. Okay.
So who's
Yeah.
the famous Swami who has an ashram there? Maybe there's
Maharishi?
many.
Is it
I
Maharishi?
think so. He's got
Okay.
the American woman who is like so fabulous and his right hand.
I'm not sure.
Okay, then maybe it's
It
not
might be
him.
Maharishi, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay, okay. But anyway,
Yeah.
going to his arti, and it was just like, am I saying it right? Arti?
Arti.
Okay, art tea. And yeah, it was just so beautiful. You've got the candles, you've got the incense, you've got the chanting, obviously. It's just, and you're right on the river. It's
Yeah.
just so stunning, so therapeutic. Yeah.
Therapeutic. Yeah. I think that's one of the things that's shifted for me too, with you were asking about like mid-age. And I think like maybe all of us, but I can say for myself, like in younger years, I was more, my mind was just more on the physical, whether it's like the pose or just our appearance or, and I find myself like more and more interested in the energetic. And it's interesting that yoga has become such a physical practice and known as a physical practice. But even the yogis, they were more focused on the energetic realms within ourselves, like the subtle body, and then also in our surroundings. But yeah, that just feels so much more important. And sometimes I think of the quote by Maya Angelou, where she said, people won't remember what you did or what you said, they'll remember how you made them feel. And
Yes.
that's so true.
True.
So it's like the form feels like it matters less. Even if we talk about a yoga class and is it half an hour of asana and then 20 minutes of pranayama and then 10 minutes of mantra or like what it's like it almost the form doesn't matter. It's just really what is the energy that we're bringing in and that we're giving and that we're leaving our students with. That feels like it matters so much more.
Oh my gosh, that quote was basically my mantra for the
Yeah.
studio. It's funny.
Oh.
I used to say I wanted it to feel like Cheers Sans drink, but most people didn't know what Cheers was because they were so young.
Oh.
So when people walked in, it's like Norm, right? Where people walk in and they would feel seen and appreciated.
Yeah.
And again, this idea of like, how do people feel when they're around you? Doesn't matter what beautiful asana you have. If like people feel yucky in your presence or after your class or and I know some of those things are out of your control, but being able to really check in with yourself of like, how am I making those around me feel? How am I helping them feel? So I love that you brought that up because you're right. The energetics, so important, so subtle, and it's hard to even give it's like vibe, right? It's hard to be like, here's what it is, because vibe
Right.
can be different for everyone, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
My last question for you, Reema, is thinking about from kind of this beautiful book, by the way, The Yogi's Way. I like to ask podcast interviewees, how do you find tranquility in the everyday? And I think we've talked about some of your practices. So I'm just wondering if there's anything else or that aligns with the book, The Yogi's Way, as you think about how you're finding tranquility at this stage of your life.
One of the ways is it may sound obvious, but really like sinking into like really embodying this motivation that we're doing this path that this practice and on this path for the benefit of all. And we say that all the time in classes, but it's different to just say it and read it and to really feel it because it can be such a fuel in our practice. And so I'm just like enjoying, I find a lot of tranquility and really sitting with that. That even if I'm having a hard day and I go to my mat because I want to experience some inner peace or some vitality or health, I'm doing that so I have more energy to give. And always just like being really rooted in that feels so nurturing and empowering. And there's one of my teachers that I quote in here. He says, if you're thinking beyond your own welfare when you do these practices, then the whole universe supports you. And it is a blessing to practice yoga, to like to have the opportunity, like the space in your life to practice daily. And so how do we maintain that blessing? And just to keep our motivation that wide and to just be curious, like in our day-to-day life or hour to hour life, how can I give? Like, how can I be in service? And really to move through the world with that question instead of, because often we can move through the world, what can I get? Or what can I get? Instead of what can I give? And that's just, ooh, it just feels like this deep nourishment.
Yeah, I love that. That's a wonderful kind of closing thought. Like, what can I give? That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Reema. Thank you for being here with us today. And congrats again on your beautiful book, The Yogi's Way. And I love the idea of the yoga lifestyle and that you're teaching kind of all these different components because it's so important. There's so much more than down dog.
Right. Absolutely.